What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush and Edwin coming at you to bring you the final verdict, the final decision on some of these injured players, to give you guys the best possible injury analysis that we can give you as you head into the fantasy football season. We are officially in week one. It is Tuesday night as we're recording this. My Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to wipe the floor with Danny's Cowboys in less than 48 hours from now.
I forgot. Yeah, I forgot that's the little rivalry you got going.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be very fun. So I'm ready. We were talking right before we jumped on here. I'm ready to stop talking about, Bryan Edwards and Traquan Smith type wide receivers in fantasy. I'm ready to actually talk about the guys that matter, talk about some games, some performances that we see from these guys. So what we're going to do today is basically break down kind of in the order of who's most important, as many as we can get to in terms of the injuries that players are currently dealing with. For those of you guys that drafted some of these players, I'm sure you're very curious on how the player that you drafted is doing from a health perspective. So Edwin, I'll let you introduce yourself real quick, plug anything you want to plug, and then we'll get right into this.
Yeah, so at FB Injury Doc on Twitter, we were just talking about my new injury tracker. If you go to fantasypoints.com, it's totally free. Go to the research and news tab, go down to injury insights. That's going to be updated in a very similar way. I'm ripping off Roto World. I'm going to try to update it as much as possible, but it's going to be specifically for injuries. So any type of injury or performance related situation with players, it's going to be updated frequently. So make sure you go to the site and check that out.
Yeah, for sure. And that is definitely a really helpful resource for those of us who maybe, they don't have Fantasy Points memberships. It's totally free. You guys can use that and you can check out whatever injury updates that you guys need. So we're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get into the first guy. So, of course, I got to start it off with the heavy hitter, the guy that you've been championing this offseason, the guy that I've been championing this offseason. This guy has not moved from my top five the entire offseason. I have not budged once. Saquon Barkley. We got some news the other day that he is expected to play week one. Of course, there's still talk of pitch counts and things of that nature. So, from a medical standpoint, are we in the clear with Saquon Barkley? We just need to worry about the workload at this point.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think you nailed it. We're beyond the point. He took contact. We're beyond the point of this being a medical issue. So when I see people on Twitter or anywhere else sort of say, oh, well, I need to see him healthy. He's healthy. That's not the problem. Now the name of the game is ramping up his workload so that he doesn't come off with this massive soft tissue strain like we saw sort of happen with Dalvin Cook, like we've seen in the past with specific ACL issues. If you ramp up too quickly, the body isn't really ready for that. A lot of people call them compensation injuries. Really, in all reality, they're likely just workload issues. They didn't get ramped up at the right pace. But if you consider historically, we were expecting Saquon to be active this entire time. We were never in doubt that he was going to be active. So that wasn't really the issue. It was always an issue of what is his workload going to look like. So from a historical standpoint, again, it's hard to compare because this is such a unique situation. But in week one, after Jamal Charles's first ACL issue in 2012, he saw 42% of snaps. Now, Jamal Charles didn't average a ton of snaps, which is why he was a beast in the first place. He ended up averaging that season like 58% of snaps, which is nuts. But the first week back, he was 42%. Adrian Peterson, for whatever reason, his week one snaps aren't there the year he came back from ACL, but week two, he saw about 61% of snaps. So Saquon's coming off of 2 years where he saw 83% of snaps. Now, unless you believe that Devontae Booker, 29-year-old fourth round journeyman, $5.5 million for 2 years, Devontae Booker is going to carry the Giants against the Broncos. I have some news for you. It's probably going to be at least a 50-50 split, right? They don't honestly want to ramp him up too quickly, but it's not going to be what you expect. But just like we talked about the last time that I was on here with you guys, you don't draft Saquon for week 1 and 2. You're going to draft Saquon for week 8. You're going to draft Saquon for week 6, for week 15. By the time that he gets ramped up and sees his massive workloads that we're used to seeing, that is when we're going to say, okay, Saquon's back. So don't panic. If you have a Saquon owner who's going to be panicking after this, then go trade for him. Maybe you can buy low on the situation, but be patient with Saquon because he's going to come back. He's going to be back.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've talked about this from a coaching standpoint too. Joe Judge, I mean, he didn't have a very impressive first year. Dave Gettleman's probably on the hot seat if Daniel Jones doesn't perform this year. These guys need to win. Like they know that he's their best offensive player, and they're not just going to not use him for as long as his, health will withstand, because they need to win to save their jobs, both the GM and the coach. So I would say that this Saquon thing, we're going to laugh at this in week 4. Is the way that I'm going to be looking at this Saquon thing, the way that I view it is that once Saquon's back on the field, back to a full workload, I think all of us are going to be like, I can't believe we were passing on this guy, similar to what we did with Dalvin Cook last year. And we talked about it with the contract situation and some of the soft tissue injuries that Dalvin Cook had dealt with, that it was a little foolish for us to pass on him last year, aside from the shoulder separation kind of issues that he was dealing with. But Saquon, I mean, I've kind of had the same stance on him the whole time. I think you kind of have steadfast on his health, and his timeline has all been lined up from a health standpoint. So off of Saquon Barkley, he's obviously one of the more important players dealing with an injury in this offseason. A couple other running backs I want to get your thoughts on that are very highly drafted running backs by a lot of people. One that's been, I mean, one of the more murky situations, I would say, of the top 3 round running backs, in DeAndre Swift. We heard it was a groin injury. I've heard it compared to David Montgomery's groin injury, but I think Dr. Morris was kind of speculating when he talked about that. So what are your thoughts kind of on DeAndre Swift's groin injury?
It's hard to say, right? Like at this point, and I mentioned this last time too, this is a chronic issue for Swift. In 2018, he had his first groin strain, then he had surgery. Then in 2020, he had a hip. We're going to assume this was probably a groin issue too, because the hip and groin are very interconnected. And a lot of times on the NFL injury reports, they'll use them interchangeably. And then in 2021, he's got this new groin issue. I don't think it's something to panic about. But when you zoom out and look at it from a big picture perspective, sort of like what you're saying with coaching, the Lions went out and signed Jamal Williams. They signed him and they didn't have to, right? And then you think on top of that, DeAndre Swift is also coming off of a concussion from 2020. He saw a lot of red zone, I think, goal line carries last year, DeAndre Swift did, which is great, but he is coming off the concussion. On top of this groin issue still sort of lingering, just the fact that we were discussing, is he going to be active in week 1? Is he not? I never thought he wasn't going to be active. What I've been saying this entire time is I don't know how much volume they're going to give him, because that's where coaching comes into play too. It doesn't matter how much volume we want Swift to handle or think he can handle. Like if the coaches are looking at him and saying, oh man, he can't handle a workload because this groin issue is acting up already. And oh, last year he had a concussion. If the coaches are viewing him that way, then it doesn't matter what we think, right? He might see a reduced volume because Jamal Williams is more than capable of carrying some of that load, right? So what I've been saying is that he's a very talented player, but he does not come without physical volatility. And on top of that, he doesn't come without like a clear path to unlimited amount of touches, right? So I think DeAndre Swift is a good pick depending on the circumstances. For me personally, as a consumer of fantasy content, it's difficult. I would have a hard time anchoring with him. If he was my anchor RB, I'd be a little nervous. I could see it happening, and a lot of people have done that, and maybe we'll look back and laugh. But I think there are plenty of legitimate question marks around DeAndre Swift on top of the groin stuff and the physical health stuff to just make me a little nervous until we see that, yeah, they're going to they're going to feed him the rock. He can handle it. This groin strain doesn't come back in week 3 or 4. You know what I'm saying? That's sort of where I'm standing.
Right. And I think the one thing that gives me confidence about DeAndre Swift, and the health thing is really my big concern with DeAndre Swift, because I haven't really pivoted off of the fact that I really love DeAndre Swift in that 3rd round area where he was going in my home league that I care the most about. You can see the trophy behind me peeking out from the corner. I started Devontae Adams at pick 9, Antonio Gibson in the 2nd round, and I swung back around in round 3 and grabbed DeAndre Swift as my RB2. So in that kind of build, I really liked getting DeAndre Swift. He's been a guy that I've always, likened to an Austin Eckler, to an Alvin Kamara type of usage in order to achieve that fantasy ceiling that we want for him, because this was a guy phenomenal in the receiving game last year, one of the best receiving backs in the league, and was by far, in my opinion, the best receiving back coming out of the 2020 NFL draft class at running back. So with Anthony Lynn now there, who's used Austin Eckler, with Dan Campbell as the head coach there, that he's used Alvin Kamara, I hope they can kind of use DeAndre Swift and preserve his role. And maybe Jamal Williams, it goes back to what he was doing with Aaron Jones in Green Bay, and kind of being that breather back to make sure that Aaron Jones, in this case DeAndre Swift, is fresh. I will say I do like that build better than like an anchor RB with Swift. I'll put it that way. Until we can, I'm not saying that Swift is like a bad pick by any means. I'm not saying fade DeAndre Swift. Obviously, he's really freaking good. What I'm saying is there are just a few question marks
that if he were my only, like if he were my top running back, I just couldn't do it yet. Personally, me. But it all depends on your risk tolerance.
For sure. And Antonio Gibson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I want to talk about these guys. I think it's going to be less of a conversation from a health perspective, but I'll get your thoughts on those guys. We did have Edwards-Helaire suffer a low ankle sprain or an ankle injury of some kind in one of the preseason games. And of course, we've had Antonio Gibson lingering with a turf toe injury. All off season's kind of been hush-hush since, about August.
So CEH is, I think he's in the clear. And I think that because I'm looking at the 2021 practice report. 1 second, let me pull it up. Okay, they haven't updated it yet. But Andy Reid came out, said not a high ankle sprain. Adam Schefter came out, said it wasn't a high ankle sprain. Probably just got a little bit banged up. I'm not too concerned for CEH. If he comes out on Wednesday, what is that, tomorrow? Yeah, Wednesday, and he's on the practice report limited or something, I'd be surprised. But that'd be when it would make my ears perk up. Antonio Gibson, yeah, that piece by Ty Dune came out. And I hope I'm saying his name right. And he did say something along the lines of fluid being drained from his toe. Kind of a weird situation. And we still don't know when that would have been. Was that before his comments about I'm not 100%? Was that after? We don't really know. So my stance on Gibson is it's a lot less murky than with Swift. I think there are more question marks around Swift specifically. But when it comes to Antonio Gibson, if he's cutting and he isn't on the practice report week 4 or 5 with his toe issue, I mean, it's full steam ahead. I really don't have concrete reasons to say, okay, fade Antonio Gibson. It's just something to sort of keep an eye on. That's really it. Yeah.
I just told you I have both him and Swift in my home league. So I'm hoping the health can, screw off.
I got to get in your leagues, man. Jeez.
Yeah, I know. And I ended up getting a number of other great players after that. I kind of reached on Chase Claypool in the 4th round, but he's my dude. I had to do it.
That's okay.
And then I swung back around with T. Higgins in the late 5th he fell to. I really like the way that I started out that draft. So that's kind of the way my team is looking. Of course, I have Devontae Adams, who's going to be probably one of the best fantasy receivers of all time. I have a feeling he's legitimately going to have that kind of a ceiling this year. Anyway, so real quick, while we're on backfields right now, I just want to talk about, I think those are all kind of the running backs that I needed to talk about, unless you feel the need to talk about any running backs that I didn't mention. Those were kind of just the big name guys that I wanted to get out of the way. On quarterbacks, while we're talking about backfields real quick, Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz, I just want your thoughts on those two guys because they were the ones dealing with injuries the last time we spoke. So I just wanted to know if anything changed since then.
Dak was a full participant on the injury report with a shoulder, but he's full participant. Shouldn't be a problem moving forward. Wentz, obviously no practice report on him yet. I want to see him practice first, but I don't anticipate this is going to be a big deal whatsoever. It was a really minor procedure, minor enough that he was already back before he jumped on the COVID list. He was going to be, full tilt or getting to the point where he was full tilt. So I'm not concerned yet. If we see that he comes out and is limited in practice, for a quarterback to be limited in practice for a lower body injury, it's a little more worrisome. So I'd maybe perk my ears up then. But as of now, I don't see any reason to be too concerned yet for either of those guys.
Okay, that's perfect. So the wide receiver position has been the one that most of the injuries has happened recently, especially with these middle tier fantasy wide receivers. So Brandon Aiyuk has been a guy that, again, I've been really high on this offseason. He's been dealing with what sounds like a hamstring strain. We also have Kenny Golladay dealing with the same thing. And Marquise Brown was dealing with it as well during training camp. So I guess I don't know if you can speak broadly about all three of those guys or specifically on Aiyuk.
Aiyuk specifically, I know that he had a strain and he spent a couple weeks away from practice and he was sprinting on the sideline again. Nick Wagner responded to one of my tweets, he's a beat reporter for San Francisco. And he said that he just sort of thinks that he has enough time and that they just bubble wrapped him. So Aiyuk does come with a little bit of a sort of yellow flag in the first week. I don't anticipate it's going to be a big problem, but with these soft tissue injuries, you don't want them coming back too quickly. Monitor the practice report. And as long as he's like a full tilt in at least one practice at the end of the week and he doesn't get downgraded, then I'm all in on Aiyuk. I love Aiyuk. I think he's going to be a smash this year. In terms of Marquise Brown, he himself said he's 100%. Most players say they're 100% most of the time, but if he comes out and I know I'm referencing injury report all the time. I think it's super important. It at least gives us an idea of where players are. If he does come out again, doesn't get downgraded, another guy who does have a little bit of an uptick in volatility until he gets through that first week after the soft tissue strain, but those two guys should be good. And then I should mention Deebo Samuel had a glute strain. because he had to get an ass MRI. I don't know if we talked about that on here. I joked with somebody else I did a podcast with. They MRI'd his glute, and so we were joking about how he had an ass MRI. But it sounds like it was a strain. It's really common. It's a hip extensor. The hamstrings work a little bit to extend the hip too. So very, very similar injury to the hamstrings. Luckily, the glutes are huge muscles. They take a lot more oxygen than the hamstrings, so they tend to recover a little bit more quickly. That's another one to monitor too, but I don't think either are going to be a big deal.
Right. And another guy that actually popped up on the injury report, I believe it was today, was Chris Godwin on my Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah. Yeah. So Chris Godwin, right? This was a little surprising. We're going to assume every time that players, or I guess teams, put quad, we assume it's not thigh. Like when we say thigh, at least in my head, we're thinking like bruise, like, helmet, contact, something. When they use quad specifically, I think more like soft tissue related. There are some good numbers. I don't have it pulled up right in front of me, but it's something like 75% of players who have a quad injury end up playing. And the quads, again, are so huge and they're so strong that it's really difficult to not rehab well from these quad injuries. He did go from, no designation on yesterday, on Monday, to limited today. Best case scenario, tomorrow he comes out full practice again. Obviously, it's a walkthrough, so it doesn't mean a ton. But at the same time, you don't want him to be limited again just for a walkthrough. He's got a little bit of volatility heading into Thursday night. But if as long as he doesn't get downgraded, it's really difficult to say don't start Chris Godwin. If it were a hamstring, it'd be a different issue. But since it's a quad strain, I'm less concerned.
Yeah, this is weird too, because this happened with Mike Evans last year too. Right before the season started, like the week of the season, Mike Evans popped up on the injury report with a hamstring strain last year, and then it limited him pretty much in that first game against New Orleans, especially, and then up until really week 4 against the Bears, he was dealing with it. So hopefully Chris Godwin can recover. Just real quick, while we're on quad injuries, does that mean Elijah Moore by this point is in the clear? He's been practicing, I believe, for a couple of weeks now.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't worry about him.
Yeah, of course. But we have to ask about Elijah Moore on this channel because he is our pet cat over here. So Julio Jones, another guy, another high-end wide receiver talent that people are going to be counting on this year. He was by far, when I farmed this out to our Discord and asked who should I ask Edwin about, by far the number one answer was Julio Jones.
Really? Was it? Yeah. Are they worried from like a soft tissue perspective?
I mean, maybe because he's been dealing with injuries in the past of this nature, and because he's probably an older receiver. Maybe that's why they're concerned.
That's fair. The thing about Julio Jones last year, if any prototype receiver was going to be thrown off by the workloads because of COVID, it was going to be Julio Jones, because he's like a freaking machine. His body's used to, for the last 10, 15 years, whatever, do the same thing. He probably eats the same thing before game day. He probably goes through the same warm up before game day. He practices the same amount of time. Like, his body is a well-oiled, tuned machine, right? So when he couldn't go into training camp, his body went haywire. And once he got into game mode, his body just wasn't ready at that point. So now that he's had an off season, he is at a little bit of an increased risk because of the soft tissue hamstring issues last year, and he is older, right? So that's always an issue. The hope is that they ramped him up slowly enough that he isn't dealing with anything now. Even though it's Julio Jones, even though it's hard to sit him, if you see him come up on the injury report with the hamstring strain, don't forget about last year. It is very difficult for any player of any caliber to play through a soft tissue strain, a hamstring strain. So if there's any advice that I've given throughout the offseason, like a general rule, if a wide receiver specifically is on the injury report with the hamstring strain, they were downgraded or they didn't practice the day before a game, and then the reports are that they're going to play, do not play that guy. Like, the start your studs narrative does not apply there. So that's what I would say about Julio Jones. But he's back. It's a new year. It's a new season. He's got a new team. He's probably taking care of his body again. So I would not necessarily put him at a super elevated risk. He's got moderate risk because of last year, but I wouldn't be too concerned.
For sure. And to close out these like high-end wide receivers, two guys that we did talk about on the last one, sounds like both of these guys are ready to go. Courtland Sutton coming off an ACL tear. Sounds like he's good to go by all accounts. And Amari Cooper,
Courtland Sutton,
also dealing with a bunch of, foot stuff again. So has anything changed on either of those two guys? You seemed moderately concerned about Amari Cooper in the first video, but you didn't seem as concerned with Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, Courtland Sutton, he's cutting, he's looking good. Soft tissue injuries may crop up for him because of the workloads, like we mentioned with Barkley. But I mean, he looks like he's ready to roll. Amari Cooper again. This to sum up the weirdness of the situation. At best, this surgery that he had in January that was supposed to be 6 weeks ended up being six months. At worst, that was a lateral move. So he's probably going to continue to struggle with foot and ankle injuries like he has in the past. He's probably going to have he's going to be playing some games with his foot on fire. You're probably going to have, one or two no-shows from Amari Cooper like we're used to seeing. But I guess it's really difficult for me to find, again, I try to find tangible reasons to be worried. The fact that the surgery took so long to recover from, that is a tangible reason to worry. However, he got placed, he got removed from the PUP. He's practicing and burning dudes in practice, like that video that was circulating. It's really difficult to tell anybody to fade Amari Cooper, but in the grand scheme of things, he is a guy that is at a little bit of an elevated risk because he's coming off that surgery that has some complications. Just at this point, you can't really mitigate your exposures, right? If you have Amari Cooper, you have Amari Cooper. I would just say I would love to have him. I don't have a problem having him. Maybe don't acquire any more shares of Amari Cooper just to stay where you're at with him.
Yeah, and he was a guy that I kind of flip-flopped back and forth due to that health uncertainty that we had. But prior to the health concerns that cropped up towards the beginning of training camp, he was a guy I was ready to put in my top 10, top 12 wide receivers because this was legitimately the best receiver in fantasy when Dak was on the field in PPR leagues. And even with Lamb there this year, if he is healthy, he plays even 14, 15 games. I still think we're talking about a top 12 receiver with the amount that team's going to pass and with Prescott coming back into the fold. So real quick, rapid fire on some like later round guys that don't matter quite as much as the guys we've talked about. This one's a personal one for me because I did draft this guy in my home league. And I also he's my highest owned tight end on Underdog right now because I get him so goddamn late. And that's Noah Fant.
Yeah, Noah Fant, dude, I'm 100%. There are no details on this, like totally undisclosed. It's a lower leg injury. We know that he was wearing like a sleeve. Now, the only thing that I can think of is that he got cleated and it's not a big deal. Like he just got a really heavy cleat and maybe needed some sutures and needed to give it some time to heal up before he went out and took contact again. Or it was a calf strain, which take about 3 weeks or so for players to come back from. Neither of those are like huge reasons to fade Noah Fant. So I wouldn't be too concerned. And again, that's sort of speculation because we don't know. None of the details are being shared with that specific situation. But given the timelines and given the reports of like his sleeve and stuff, those are the two things that pop up for Noah Fant. But yeah, I like Noah Fant a lot. I think he's really good. I just wish they'd use him more.
Yeah, I think and I've talked about this before with Noah Fant, like you're talking about, we love the freak athletes, right? The freak athletes, everybody gets excited, especially at tight end, where tight ends is such a barren wasteland of a position. But Noah Fant was a freak athlete that commanded top 6 targets at the position last year. Like that is a rare combination. And he got a quarterback upgrade in Teddy Bridgewater. So he is a guy that I have been grabbing everywhere. I think he is the most undervalued tight end in fantasy. I think he should be right up there behind his teammate, his former Iowa teammate, and TJ Hawkinson. I think he should be right behind him in terms of ADP. And often you're getting him 30, 40, 50 picks after TJ Hawkinson, especially on sites like Underdog. So two more that I want to talk about here is Curtis Samuel. He popped up again recently. I guess he's going back to practice. I'm actually not even sure what the details are on his situation. So I'll let you kind of talk about that.
Yeah, Curtis Samuel went back to practice, was in pads, according to one of the beat writers. At this point, it took so long, basically June to now, for him to get back to practice. The only way I'm confident in Curtis Samuel and using Curtis Samuel in any lineups, DFS, whatever, is if he gets through the entire week, full practice. If there's even one limited practice in there, I'm not inclined to roster him anywhere, DFS, anything, just because this is a really eerie situation. They either decided not to do surgery, but it could have been indicated, or it was something that went away, came back, and it's getting finicky. So I want to see him do it first before I use him in any lineups.
Right. Okay. And then the last one, and then I'll let you close it out with any kind of thoughts you have if I forgot anybody or anything like that. But Rashod Bateman, another guy that I've been a big fan of this offseason. He suffered an injury in training camp. I think it was like right after we recorded the first one. So we didn't get your thoughts on that. I believe it's the same injury that Odell Beckham had a couple of years ago. Is it a sports hernia? Is that the same injury?
Yep. You got it. So he did have a sports hernia. They put him on the PUP. It sounds like it's more of a traditional sports hernia. So they put him in bubble wrap. They put him on the PUP, or the short-term IR, sorry, and you're likely not going to see him until week 5. Week 4 is a possibility, but much more likely in week 5. And he's a guy that I think could be, he could definitely put you on the radar if you're in the red by week 3 or 4 and you're really struggling. Maybe you won one game. Put this dude on your IR, stash him, put him somewhere. I think that he's going to be special, and this injury does really well after the surgery.
That's good news because he's been a guy I've kind of compared his situation. Even guys like Jefferson and Aiyuk and Higgins last year, even though they were on the field at the beginning of the season, they really didn't make an impact until week 3, week 4, week 5. So if Bateman comes back week 5 or week 6 and is the guy that I think he can be, which is the number 1 receiver for a former MVP quarterback that led the league in passing touchdowns 2 years ago, I think a lot of people are going to remember real quick that we probably shouldn't fade players because of landing spots anymore. Because Bateman to me just screams, we're all going to look stupid for fading this guy about, 2 to 3 months into the season. Anyway, that's all the guys that I had. Was there anybody else that you thought? I know Evan Ingram's dealing with a calf injury. I don't care. Evan Ingram stinks anyway. Gio Bernard popped up on the injury report recently as well with a high ankle issue. I just don't want that anything to do with that backfield. It's my team. Trust me. It's going to be a 3-way committee. I don't want anything to do with that backfield. I'll take Rojo because he's the most talented guy, but outside of that, I'm not touching him. Yeah,
Gio, he's practicing in full. Like you said, he doesn't take a lot. He's not going to get a lot of volume anyway. So I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something there. Some people are using Gio. I don't know.
Maybe it more so affects Fournette and Rojo. The fact that Gio is out.
Right. Exactly. And then other than that, you said one other person. Who was it?
If you have anybody else, I know Trey Lance had like a finger injury.
Lance is going to be fine. Yeah. Lance is going to be fine. His small little fracture in his finger. They took him off the splint already. Alexander Madison, if you don't own Cook and you cuffed Madison, this is a weird situation. He is not practicing, undisclosed, no details. We don't know what's going on yet. But yeah, Evan Ingram probably won't be back until week 2 or 3, probably week 3. T.Y. Hilton, I think that more so bumps Paris Campbell up in the volume, at the very least in the volume perspective, from the volume perspective. And yeah, man, I think that's it. I think we covered most of them.
The last one that I just remembered was, do we have any updates on Joe Burrow?
Joe Burrow, he should start week 1. By all accounts, we think that he's going to start. There's no reason to believe that he's not at this point. So what I would say is expect a lot of him getting comfortable, maybe some more 3-step drops, slants to Boyd, dump offs to Mixon until he gets into a rhythm, and watch him to see how often he takes off and I'll be watching him. I guess that's my job. And I'll let you all know what he looks like coming off that ACL. But I think if you're going for ceiling, maybe wait on it because we don't know yet. You might not get a Joe Burrow ceiling, but we'll he should get into the swing of things. So yeah, he should be ready to roll.
For sure. And thank you for joining us. I definitely needed all that injury insight. As you can tell, Gibson, Swift, Fant, I own all of these guys in my own league, so I definitely needed...
You didn't even hit record. You're just going to ask me about these guys.
Yeah, no, I had to ask you about the guys that were going to personally affect my team. And like Edwin said, the injury insights page on fantasypoints.com, it is totally free to view. You guys can see it without having a Fantasy Points membership, although you should get a Fantasy Points membership if you don't already have one, because it is a great site to use. Been a site I've been a member of for quite some time now. And I'll show some screenshots on the screen so you can see what the injury write-ups look like right now. And Edwin, as he said, he's going to update them as frequently as he can. If you guys don't have time to watch a 30-minute video like this one on injuries, you can just go check out that site, and that should give you everything you guys need. And, of course, the Injury Prone podcast will also give you that as well. I'll let you plug anything else you want to.
That's it. You got it, man. I appreciate you having me again. This is always fun, man. Good luck this year.
For sure. Yeah, we gotta tackle some championships. Hopefully one of us can win one of these big best ball contests. I torched a lot of money on Underdog Fantasy this season. It pays off to some degree.
Yep.
All of you guys, thank you for joining us. Peace out and enjoy your Wednesday.
Why you need the